hear the name Paul McCartney, most people picture the charming Beatle with that boyish smile, melodic bass lines, and timeless songs like Yesterday and Hey Jude.
Hey Jude, don't be afraid.
To the world, he's the cultural icon who helped change popular music forever, a knight of the realm, a national treasure, and one of the most beloved figures in rock history. But here's the truth. Behind the friendly public image, Paul has always had a sharper edge than many realize. For decades, he's been known among insiders as a perfectionist with very specific standards about what real music should be. And when bands didn't measure up, he wasn't shy about letting people around him know exactly how he felt. Sure, in public interviews, Paul usually plays the diplomat, polite, measured, careful not to rock the boat. But those closest to him have seen another side. Former Wings guitarist Denny Laine once revealed, "With Paul, there was always competition. He knows what he likes, and he's not afraid to say what he doesn't." That competitive streak often came out in private conversations, recording sessions, and even at industry events, moments where McCartney's polite mask would slip and his real opinions surfaced. And those opinions, sometimes they turned into full-blown rivalries. From legendary bands who McCartney dismissed as mere imitators, to younger upstarts whose brash attitudes rubbed him the wrong way, Paul's hidden grudges reveal a side of him that casual fans almost never see. These weren't just little disagreements about style. They were clashes of philosophy, artistry, and ego, the kind of rivalries that helped shape the history of rock and roll itself. So in this video, we're going to uncover 6 famous bands that Paul McCartney couldn't stand, and the surprising reasons why even one of the world's most diplomatic rock stars let his guard down. Some of these stories will make you laugh, some will shock you, and all of them show that even the cute Beatle wasn't always so cute when it came to his peers. 6. The Rolling Stones. When it comes to Paul McCartney's musical rivals, no band looms larger than the Rolling Stones. The Beatles versus Stones rivalry didn't just define an era, it became the ultimate battle of British rock. On the surface, it was often portrayed as a friendly competition, 2 legendary bands inspiring each other while ruling the charts. But behind the scenes, McCartney's feelings about the Stones were far less polite. Paul never fully bought into the mythology that the Stones were equals to the Beatles. In fact, he often downplayed their originality. "I've always thought the Rolling Stones were just a blues cover band that got lucky," McCartney allegedly told producer George Martin during a late-night Abbey Road session in 1968. It was a harsh comment, and one that echoed through the years. Fast forward to 2021, and Paul couldn't resist taking another jab in an interview with The New Yorker. He said, "I'm not sure I should say it, but they're a blues cover band. That's sort of what the Stones are. I think our net was cast a bit wider than theirs." Naturally, Mick Jagger didn't let that slide. He fired back on stage, joking that the Beatles were just a 4-piece with one drummer, while reminding everyone that the Stones were still filling stadiums decades later. For Paul, the issue ran deeper than just playful rivalry. He genuinely felt that the Stones were always chasing the Beatles' footsteps. Former Apple Records executive Peter Brown once explained, "Paul always believed the Stones copied their moves, releasing similar album concepts months after the Beatles had already done it." That sense of imitation clearly rubbed McCartney the wrong way. Things even got tense inside the Beatles. When John Lennon briefly considered producing a Rolling Stones album in 1969, Paul was reportedly furious. Studio engineer Jeff Emmerich recalled that Paul questioned why John would waste his talents on them when the Beatles still had their own projects demanding attention. And while McCartney has occasionally praised specific Stones songs, the competitive edge never really faded. Even when he tried to sound diplomatic, there was always a sting. In a 2016 Rolling Stone interview, Paul admitted, "They're a great band, but they're just not the Beatles, are they?" 5. The Sex Pistols. If there was ever a band that clashed head-on with Paul McCartney's idea of what music should be, it was the Sex Pistols. To Paul, punk rock wasn't just a new sound. It felt like a direct attack on everything the Beatles had built. According to Linda McCartney's brother, John Eastman, Paul once said the Pistols' music was an assault on his ears. He simply couldn't understand why people would celebrate musicians who, in his eyes, couldn't even play their instruments properly. The Pistols, of course, were never shy about firing back. Johnny Rotten mocked Paul publicly, calling him a dinosaur, the very kind of establishment figure punk wanted to tear down. And Sid Vicious was even more blunt. In early 1977, when Wings and the Sex Pistols were recording in neighboring studios at London's AIR facility, Paul made a friendly attempt to introduce himself. Sid reportedly muttered, "Sellout," under his breath. Paul turned on his heel and walked away, refusing to acknowledge them again. It wasn't just the insults. What really stung Paul were the direct attacks on his legacy. Wings drummer Denny Seiwell recalled that Paul was deeply bothered when he heard the Pistols were using Beatles posters for target practice during rehearsals. He laughed it off in public, but those close to him said it clearly struck a nerve. Years later, Paul would grudgingly admit that the punk movement had cleared the air in music, breaking down bloated 70s rock excess. But when it came to the Sex Pistols specifically, his feelings never softened. In a 2016 BBC interview, when asked about the band, he forced a polite smile and said, "Not my cup of tea, really." 4. Oasis. In the 1990s, a new wave of British rock stars emerged, and none were louder about their Beatles worship than Oasis. Noel Gallagher openly called Paul McCartney his biggest inspiration, but instead of flattery, Paul mostly found it irritating. His longtime publicist Jeff Baker once explained, Paul thought their obsession with the Beatles was tiresome. He felt they reduced decades of innovation into a handful of copied chords and recycled melodies. At a private dinner in 1997, Paul reportedly vented to George Martin, "They've got the swagger right, but where's the originality? We never just copied our heroes, we transformed them." The Gallagher brothers' arrogance didn't help. When Noel boldly declared Oasis were bigger than the Beatles, Paul dismissed the comparison as ridiculous. According to Beatles biographer Philip Norman, he privately described the band as half the talent with twice the ego. One infamous moment came at the 2000 Q Awards. Liam Gallagher approached Paul for an autograph, but Paul's lukewarm, almost cold response made it clear he didn't think much of them. 3. The Monkees. The Monkees might have been a TV sensation, but for Paul McCartney, they were little more than a cheap imitation of the Beatles. To him, their entire act, four young guys with catchy tunes and mop-top charm, felt like a corporate attempt to cash in on what the Beatles had created organically. Beatles assistant Alistair Taylor recalled, Paul called them a plastic imitation. He'd even turn off the radio if their songs came on. What especially irritated him was that the Monkees hadn't paid their dues. While the Beatles had honed their craft for years in Hamburg clubs and dingy pubs, the Monkees were assembled in a casting call for television. Things escalated after Sgt. Pepper's was released. Suddenly, the Monkees TV show began experimenting with psychedelic visuals and surreal humor. George Harrison noted that Paul often complained, "They're following our blueprint without doing any of the work." 2. The Bee Gees. By the late 70s, the Bee Gees had become the kings of disco, selling millions of records with Saturday Night Fever. But their success came at a time when Paul's solo career was facing turbulence, and insiders say he took it personally. Producer Chris Thomas explained, Paul felt blindsided by disco. Suddenly, these three brothers were outselling Beatles records, and he resented it. According to Wings guitarist Lawrence Juber, Paul would listen to the Bee Gees' falsetto harmonies and mutter that they'd abandoned their original sound for cheap commercial gain. In private, he criticized their hits as the same three chords sped up with a drum machine. 1. The Beach Boys. No rivalry cut deeper than Paul McCartney's with the Beach Boys, and especially Brian Wilson. At first, there was admiration. When Pet Sounds came out in 1966, Paul was blown away. George Martin recalled that Paul played the album non-stop, telling him, "We need to go further than this." That inspiration pushed the Beatles into making Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. But admiration soon gave way to rivalry. When Brian Wilson abandoned his ambitious Smile project due to personal struggles, Paul was dismissive, reportedly saying, "If you can't finish what you start, you shouldn't be in this business. We push through no matter what." Things got tense at a 1967 dinner party at Wilson's home, where Paul openly criticized several Beach Boys songs as simplistic and their harmonies as predictable. According to drummer Dennis Wilson, Brian was devastated, falling into days of silence after the encounter. Publicly, Paul sometimes praised God Only Knows, even calling it a perfect song. Subtle reminders that he still believed the Beatles had gone further. Beach Boys historian David Leaf put it best, Paul respects Brian's work, but he'll never fully admit how much it influenced him. To do that would mean admitting someone else helped push the Beatles forward. For Paul, the Beach Boys were not just rivals. They were the one band that truly challenged him, and that perhaps is why he never gave them full credit. And that's our countdown of the 6 bands that Paul McCartney couldn't stand. From friendly competition with the Stones to bitter rivalries with punks and pop stars, even the cute Beatle had a sharp edge. Which of these feuds surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more untold stories from rock history.